Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the T.O.A podcast. I am your host, Onvermel, and once again, I am joined today by my eldest brother, Hau1. How are you doing today?
We're living through a thunderstorm, so hopefully we stay here.
It's always a fun time. We had one of those a couple nights ago over here, and pretty much every night's I think a chance of a thunderstorm up where I am. So I feel that, but being 2 hours earlier in the day, it's too early for thunderstorms here.
It's a good metaphor for life, the crack and the thunder and the was that Variki?
Oh, Variki. Well, that's a thing that's been popping up into our BIonicle world a little bit lately. But to you folks, that's not going to be the technically the subject of today. He might end up being part of the conversation if it leads that way. No, we are going to be talking actually about your BIonicle Dark Age, How one.
Yes, although I don't think we can talk about my dark age without sort of establishing what existed before the dark age.
That's very true.
So, for context, I am 34 years old, which means that when Bionicles came out in 2001, I was kind of a little bit, just a tiny bit too old for them. I was 14.
Been like about 2 years past the target
Two
audience.
years past the target audience, but our family is a little bit not normal, in case that hasn't come up in one of the previous episodes. And with several younger brothers and not a whole lot of peer pressure because we were homeschooled, there was a little bit more of a long twilight of Lego interest in childhood, which turned into Lego interest in adulthood. And when Bionicles first came out, I may not have been the target audience, but I bought a lot of the Bionicle sets.
I'm pretty sure if you bought the sets, that means you were the audience. Because I wouldn't say they had a very specific target audience, but they were mostly trying to get uh teenage boys, like young teenage boys, which you were.
Yeah, I don't even know if teens was so much the target audience as children and perhaps specifically boys. Um, but be that as it may, I got into Bionicles as all of the, not just all of the boys, but really all of the kids in the family did get into Bionicles at least to an extent. Or let put it this way, we all got some Bionicles. And for those of us at the top of the list, for me and the Lost T.O.A, we sort of divvied up the Bionicles and said, okay, I'm going to focus on these three elements, and you're going to focus on those three elements. And really, we each had a prime element. In my case, it was the red, the Taz, the Tahus, and in the Lost Toa's case, it was the white, the Co Matoran, and everything to do with them. But we also had secondary collections. So I at the time I went into my dark ages, so to speak, properly, I believe I owned every red set that wasn't a Titan. So I owned every. And I don't think I owned Jawa, technically the Mictoran at the time.
There was I think by the end of your uh by the time you sold basically your collection majority of your collection off, I think you were only missing two red Bionicles, the last two, a car and the Stars Tahoe. You had everything up to that point.
Yeah, so one does sort of need to distinguish between the me going into my dark age and me selling off the Bionicles, because I'd say there was a gap between them. So the dark age itself probably hit about 2008, or with the 2008 wave. I am old enough and got into it early enough that my real interest was the Mata Nui years, 2001, 2002, 2003. And with the Mask of Light, that was sort of the end of my real, true, deep interest of my original Bionicle run.
What I remember though with what your stuff was that also you and the Lost Toa didn't have as much interest in the Metro Nui years. Though I do remember you getting a bit of a surge of enjoyment with specifically the design of the Metro Nui Toa, but also specifically the Hordika.
Yeah, so there were the Dark Ages didn't start until 2008. So there's a 5 year gap, or 2008, 2009 ish. I'm ballparking it, but it was after the Fantoka and the Mystica when we left. the Matoran universe and went to the Glatorian universe, that was sort of the point where it was like, okay, I'm just not into it anymore. Um,
Yeah.
and I'd had there were other reasons for that where I was in my own life. In 2010, I moved to the United States, finished my undergraduate degree, and I was looking for my graduate degree. And I moved countries, and so that was a sort of a major turning point. And um, that's probably the best dividing line if you want a black and white between not Dark Ages and in my Dark Ages.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could even say that your Dark Ages started, as you were actually just what you were saying earlier, kind of had the early signs at 2004. Because if I'm correct, after 2003, you pretty much only had the reds sets. You didn't have any in the black or brown after like 2003.
Yeah, so there was a difference. Like I said, there was sort of a slide, and different things happened in that 5 year gap. I wasn't originally keen on the idea that there was a whole city underneath Matanui, so my biggest push away from it was lore. I wasn't sold on the lore right away. I didn't necessarily like the idea of doing a prequel. You got to remember, at the time, prequels weren't necessarily everybody's favorite thing. And it was 2004, which 2004 I started that in grade 11. I finished that in grade 12. Other stuff was going on. I had a driver's license now. There was other stuff going on in my life. That's when the great take apart happened, and in my Fig universe, I was on Classic Castle and I was building things. So just Bionicle sort of got edged out. It wasn't really drawing me in, and I wasn't. I had a lot of other stuff distracted me. And as you noted, there that did sort of mark a shift in the intensity of the Bionicle collecting I did. I went from collecting three different colors really to just collecting the reds. And I actually think there was a bit of a gap. I didn't get Vakama right away, Toa Vakama, that is. I got him, I think, a year or two later by trading something with one of you guys.
Actually, that specifically, well, it was in 2006, and you had gone, Velika, the Matorn from the 2006 year, and that was a brown bongo that I hadn't purchased yet, and for some reason you had bought them, and I had traded Metronui Winua to Ek because he started collecting like officially collecting the blacks then. So I would get the Vakama, and then I would trade that Vakama to you to get the Velika. And that's the only brown barnacle that I have not gone sealed, that I have not opened sealed.
There's definitely a possibility that I bought Velika, partly speculatively. I think it happened right when I was in one of my Bionicle moods. So one of the spikes was like I got back into Bionicle and was like, oh, I want all these things and I want to get all these things. And I think I bought Velika because I could find him, which I couldn't find everything, obviously. I probably bought a Balta at the same time. And if you want my guess, I was able to get my Hordika then, because they were probably still lingering in stores, but I wasn't able to get a Vakama. So if I didn't buy Velika deliberately thinking of trading for a Vakama, it was serendipity, probably.
Because I don't think you would have done it intentionally, because it was after you got your Velika that I did the trade for the, or maybe Jordan, or maybe Ek already did the trade for the Tuometru, because like I said, he tried collecting the reds and then he switched over to black, like in like the later Metro New years. I don't know. But for whatever reason, that happened for you to get Vakama. Even like or to get Vakama you got later. It was definitely clear that, even from us younger brothers, that you were losing interest. And I specifically remember like 2004, you guys not showing, being kind of more on the fence about how you felt about it. And I think a large part that came down to was yours and the Lost Toa's age. Because us younger ones, we're still young enough that we just kind of accepted everything that the story gave us. If there's a city underground that geography didn't make a whole lot of sense, we just accepted it. But you guys being a little bit more older might have started having more kind of the edge lord, oh, that's not cool anymore, that's silly, I'm smarter than this, maybe.
There was definitely an element of that. And, your late teen years, or really any teen year, is a good time to have very strong opinions about canon. Right around the same time, 2001, 2002, 2003, is when the Lord of the Rings movies came out, and I had very strong feelings about them. the prequel movies were coming out, and I had very strong feelings about them. Generally positive, I think, at the time, but also like willing to super nitpick stuff. And like the Harry Potter movies were starting to come out, and they weren't the books. And so my really strong first impression, what made me fall in love with Bionicle, was the Mata Nui aesthetic. And if you want to say where my like raised eyebrows started, it might have even been as early as the Toa Nuva. The Toa Nuva have never captured my love as much as the original Toa, and that's the second year of Bionicle that we're talking about.
It does seem like the Toa Nuva, when you look at the first 3 years, didn't capture anyone like the Toeman did. Like everyone, even if people basically got into the Tonua first, I feel like everyone agrees that they just aren't as good. And I'm pretty sure when it comes down to 2002 and 2003, it was the Titan and the villain sets that people remember more so than the Toa Nuva.
Oh yeah, the Bull Rock are awesome to the extent that I will forgive them doing the Bull Rock twice in the Bull Rock Call, just because the design of them is so awesome.
I don't mind the extra versions of them. They're beautiful and so much fun.
And yeah, the large scale sets, especially in 2003. If you want my peak of like Bionicle love, sort of peaks with Jowler and the Gecko Bird, and I that's probably the Bionicle set that I wanted the most in the years I wanted a Bionicle set. And because it was larger than a canister set and larger than a small set, it was a little bit more of an investment. And I kind of recall it being a little bit difficult to find, and I got it, and I was like that was the height of Bionicle wanting satisfaction. And at the same time, there was the Takanuva set and the Makuta set, and I remember those three very fondly, as well as the Matoran in 2003. I'll be honest, the Mictoran are cuter, but I was just happy after 2 years of not having had any Mictoran, and I didn't get the Boxer set, so I was just happy to have readily available Matoran.
I'm pretty sure that was a sentiment that we all could agree on with 2003. Like pretty much like everyone loved 2003, and I think the whole fact that there was a movie going along with it, which was the first Lego related movie ever, was just helped the Bionicle hype so much.
Yeah, the Mask of Light movie was sort of along the same lines as all those other movies I mentioned: Star Wars, The Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. It was an adaptation of something that pre-existed, and therefore I had strong feelings about it. And I didn't entirely love it, but it did add to the hype for sure.
I was gonna say we'll definitely have a conversation about those movies one of these days. We will get there, but it's definitely interesting like that. Your Dark Ages basically took about what 5 years to actually kick in.
Yeah, the from the height of my Bionicle love in say 2003 until when the Dark Ages really kicked in, and let's say it was after 2008, because in 2008 I still got the last Toa Tahu, the one that I've always called Toa Trucker, because I'm sorry, that does not look like a Hau that he's wearing.
Sorry, Hau1, I had to correct you there for a second. He's not the last T.O.A. that Lego released. That was in 2010.
Okay, but 2010 is during my Dark Ages, so I don't know about that. Or those other things in 2015, 2016.
those are reboots, so that doesn't count.
So the last Toa Tahu, and I had the quote unquote rad Makuta,
Antros.
Antros, and I had his little Avmatoran buddy. And I actually had one of the larger sets. I had Voltraz and his flying mobile.
Yeah, his vehicle doesn't have a name. It's just the set's just called Voltraz.
It's just called Voltraz, but it's more than just him. There is a flying mobile in it. And so I had all of those, and that was the end of it. And like I said, the Glatorians came, and I wasn't into them. I stopped having any interest in Bionicle lore, because what had really happened over the 5 year slide is that I would not really think of Bionicle at all while I was at college. And I would come home either at Christmas or the summer, and you guys would be all into them, and I'd see the Bionicles, and I'd probably steal some of your magazines and read the comics, or I'd go on the internet and get into the lore, and I'd go and buy all of the red ones that I'd missed, and repeat again the next holiday. And when the Glatorians came, the fact that there were no characters, obviously other than Matanui himself, but there were no Matoran. It wasn't in the Matoran universe. From a large scale look at the lore now that I've sort of recovered from my Dark Age, I find it quite fascinating. But at the time, it was just from an up close visual. It's just like, okay, first the Toa Nuva, now the Metro Nui underneath the city, and then these crazy looking Toa truckers, and now this. I'm out. I'm done.
Well, I mean, Gatorian was a soft reboot. It even almost had Ek basically exit out of Bionicle because I know for him too, it was kind of that same time. But the good thing about the Gatorians was it was mostly. I don't know if I got you Ranu and Malum for Christmas, but I know I was the cause for at least one of those. Because you did have the first wave of. You did have Ranu and Malum, the first two red Gatorian sets.
And there are a lot of Bionicle sets that I regret that I got rid of. I don't remember owning those two. I am taking your word for it.
See, because I remember it because it was a kind of beginning when we started, drawing names for sibling gifts giving. And of course, the idea of you going to a Dark Age of Bonk was silly to me. I was like, no, Michael, Hau1 needs to have all of these the red Bonkles, so obviously I need to get him Ranu and Malum. I don't know if I got you both of them or if I just got you Malum and you ended up picking up Ranu just randomly. But I remember at that point I was still like thinking like, no, he needs to have these. Obviously, it was tradition. Like he needed to get these. But let's be honest. From that Christmas, I'm pretty sure the Crystal King I got you was the standout set.
The Crystal King remains the crown jewel of my Rock Raider slash Power Miner collection.
It honestly is a beautiful set.
Yeah, and it might be the largest one I have.
Probably.
Yeah, I looking back now, I'm like, oh, I had Gotorians and I didn't even know it, and I should have hung on to them. But there's a lot of things I should have hung on to, quote unquote, that I did not hang on to. And that you may be the wrong audience for saying I should have hung on to them because you were one of those who benefited from it.
That no, that is true because when you did sell off your collection, you sold it to us three younger brothers, which for me specifically, the main article that I ended up getting from you that helped my collection the most was the Canny Raw. I didn't get the full set because me and X split the Canny Raw and Waka, but I got the Canny Raw half, which has become quite a staple in my collection now.
Yeah, if you look at the sets that I owned in terms of what was most iconic and it's hardest to believe that I got rid of, the Muwaka and the Kanera is probably takes the cake. I mean, that's the only classic Rahi set that I had complete. I also had most of a Tarakava set, such that I had built the blue one and didn't have enough pieces to build them both, so I built the blue one, and I used a lot of the teal that I had to make a made-up teal Toa, really the first and at the time only Bionicle mock I'd ever made. And I think what happened when I sold it off is you got the Muwaka, Ek got the Kanara, and Zaktag got the Tarakava, as well as the leftover teal stuff.
Yeah, but then you also had a Rama set that was almost complete. I think it was missing a couple wings, like proper wings, and I know me and X split that one as well.
That I don't remember as well. I had a whole bunch of stuff that I got in used Lego one Christmas from probably around 2007, 2008, so I don't remember it as clearly. And there was a lot of Fig stuff in there as well. One of our sisters got that for me, and it was an excellent batch of stuff. But what I remember best is the Terrakava, and I also got my, at the time, first and only white set. I got a Kopaka.
Actually, you technically got two sets because you got two Mictoran. You got a maskless Huki and a maskless Matoro. I got the Huki parts for some masks that I basically got all the masks from your bunch from a different lot from a thrift store, which obviously was the same place. You traded like the Nui Rama mask, the Kopaka mask to get these Huki parts, and I'm assuming you must have just sold the Matoro parts instantly to Daniel.
It must have been something like that because I, again, don't remember that I had them. And this is perhaps a recurring theme of the slide is that it didn't lodge itself into my memory as strongly as those original few years. The most notable thing that I remember of the years of the slide is the last great game, or at least setting up for what would have been the last great game in the basement. One of the summers, and it might not have been the very end. I don't know if the Fantoka Mystica had come out yet, but the Mari definitely had, because I had the only Mari Toa, of course, was Jowler, because he's the red one. Although I think I had two, if not three, of the Baraki.
Yes, well, you had two of the Brocky because the Lost Toa had gone 5 out of 6 of them on sale at a local store, but he couldn't find the brown one, so you ended up with like the black and the red, and he ended up with his other three. I was there when he bought them, so I remember this. I also because when you were away from the house, within college and stuff, I took a lot of peeks at your bottle collection because it was readily available in the basement for me to look at.
I understand. I quite understand. So I remember that game, and the biggest thing that I remember about that game is perhaps a thread that I've sort of picked up on as I've come out of my dark ages, is I'd sort of reached the point of saying, okay, I can enjoy Bionicles without having to follow the official canon. There's been some canon tweaking. Every kid plays with their toys however they want, and we were always pretty, at least me and the Lost Toa, we had to follow the rules.
I specifically am really bad with that because if you actually read a Bionicle story that I've been working on, and as you were pointing out, that it was more like lore accurate than you were expecting or related stuff. I have tried very hard not to contradict the lore, which is where you and me, I would say, differ in our Bionicle universes.
Yeah, I basically decided at that point that I didn't like all the lore that they had established. I didn't like, Metro Nui being underneath. I didn't like the Toa Nuva. So, if I was just gonna get grumpier and grumpier, why is Jala a Toa now? And why are they going underwater and turning into fish? And et cetera, et cetera. At some point it's just like, well, if you don't like their story but you like the sets, make your own lore. And I've sort of in my resurgence now, rebuilding what I have rebuilt and sort of tinkering with it. I'm at the point in my life I don't really play Lego the way I once did, which is to say I don't really play with it as much. I talk about it and I think about it and I build it and I make stories with it in comics. And so the big thing for me is I've really gotten into Bionicles is A, rebuilding some of the sets and reacquiring some of the sets and building mocks really for the first time in my Bionicle life, other than the late lamented T.O.A. The big thing has sort of been, okay, what's the story for these guys and how do they fit into my Legoverse? Because they're not a separate Legoverse really in my head. They are mostly on their own, but they are in a corner of my greater Legoverse. So in theory, they could turn up in my minifig scale comics, but even if they don't, how do they fit into the jigsaw puzzle?
Basically, you need to find a reason they can exist just in case that they ever do exist.
The other thing is I've gotten back into the lore. Maybe I'm jumping ahead to after the Dark Ages here, but the thing is that I've really in my rediscovery of Bionicles, which is now something like a 7-8 month project in different stages of intensity. I've really gotten back into the lore and I've started to really appreciate and enjoy all the lore of the eras that I didn't care for as much in the early days. I'm now all about Metro Nui. I'd rather go live to Metro Nui than Mata Nui if you want to know how drastically this has taken hold in me. And the Matoran universe with the Mari and even the Barra Magna Glatorians, there's a lot of stuff that I'm liking the lore aspects of it, but I'm still not necessarily going to import it all wholesale. I'm still sort of looking to tweak it for me, which is, by the way, what I have done with Star Wars in my comics. It's not pure blooded what happens in the Star Wars movies.
Well, I think the way I have described your Legoverse as a whole is like the new Star Wars canon. There are certain aspects, like the original 6 movies, or in certain cases, certain things about the Toa, that are guaranteed not to change. Like these are staple things that are not going to change. However, you're picking and choosing what parts from the expanded universe that you want to keep and reworking them for a a lore that you prefer more.
That's not a terrible way of thinking about it. And one thing that I have the advantage of is I have enough years since the old lore that I have a little bit of perspective on it, you might say. Because the Bionicle Dark Age, whether we say that it happened in 2008, right after the Mystica and Fantoka, or whether we say it happened after you gave me those two Glatorians in like 2009, or whether it happened in 2010 when I moved to the United States, somewhere when it happened around there, I did nothing with Bionicles after that until this past December. I did nothing except sell off a very substantial part of the BIonicle collection that I had. I basically hung on to the T.O.A, the Taraga,
Your Mictorn.
well, the one Jaller that I had, which our brother had got me, and I hung on to Lecon and Vikama because I really like the Toa Metru build.
Well, I believe you still have Norik as well.
Yes, I do, and he's also a Metru build. And I hung
Yeah.
on to the Hordika Vikama because his self-pitying hatred in my personal characterization of him gives me life and joy.
Well, your personal characterization of the Hordika, basically set the precedent for how the rest of basically your like loathing Bakama made him so amusing that we actually all decided to get Hordika because that was like the one Bionicle year where everyone didn't really get into it right away. Everyone was behind on getting on to 2005.
And I think that's partly because timeline wise, me and the Lost Toa both still lived at home, so we were still providing some example there. They didn't have any masks in the classic sense where you can take, like, the Metro were already a little suspect on this part. Where were the mask packs where you can get all 6 of their masks that they have to find by going all over the island? Where's their gold masks and their silver masks? But even so, their masks were still masks. You can take them off and put them on a different head.
Yeah. I think a large part of 2005 also was, at least in 2004, you still had a cool collectible with the discs. But when we saw the gimmick of the spinners, at least I know us three younger ones just thought the spinners were stupid. Despite really liking them now, I think they're actually really fun.
I still don't really get them. I mean, I think they're fun, don't get me wrong, but as an in universe bit of lore, the idea of a spinner still really doesn't do it for me.
Nah, that's fair. That's fair. But like, I would definitely say that your Dark Ages had like several stages to it. It had stage one of basically 2004, basically starting to have issues with the lore, and then it kind of like got kicked into high gear at 2008 when you actually were like, okay, now I'm just like don't have the time for it. But the nail in the coffin was when you didn't get the last red sets in the Praetorian wave. That was like the final nail in the coffin for the Bionicle exposure.
And obviously, then Bionicle ended, and Hero Factory. I still know very little about it except that it exists. And you know what? I think if I hadn't moved to the states the way I did, if I had taken all the Bionicle with me, or if I hadn't moved at all, but I things might have changed. I might have come out of the Dark Ages sooner, just because let's be honest, Bionicles are cool. Or it might not have triggered such a strong nostalgia impact when I did come out of it the way that it did this year. It's been a really strong, like, it's the last piece of my childhood Lego nostalgia puzzle. So it's just been really hitting me. And maybe it wouldn't have been as strong if I had kept them all the whole time.
That is true. You have been lamenting that a lot lately, which I guess brings us to the point of what officially brought you out of the Dark Ages. Because I will admit, you getting showing interest in Bionicle did kind of come out of left field a little bit for me.
So the thing that really started it was discovering a bunch of used Lego last December. I am the romance of finding mystery Lego, used Lego. It's reached a point in my life where I'm not really always into the new stuff that Lego has. It can be expensive. The themes aren't always for me. I mean, it's usually really beautiful stuff, but it's I'm not interested in enough in to buy it myself. I've got enough town Lego. They don't make Castle and Pirates and Classic Space anymore. So basically, for new sets, it's like maybe a Star Wars set if I'm in a good Star Wars mood, but those are really expensive. Maybe some collectible minifigs, something here or there, but I'm not really into new Lego as much anymore. But used Lego, you never know what you're going to get with used Lego. So last December, I stop at a Savers on my way home from work, and there is used Lego to be found. But the various bags don't include a whole lot of system. Now, I say not a whole lot because there was a little bit, because there were clearly some Throwbot sets in there. There was and that's kind of what got me hooked. I bought the one bag because it had the chrome trumpet in it. And the last chrome trumpet I got was in 1997. I only have 2 of them, and they are both like peeling and beaten up. And I'm like, ooh, that's a beautiful little chrome trumpet.
I mean, I bought used Lego bags just for a chrome piece before, so I completely understand this.
So I bought that bag, and I think I might have bought a second one, like just a couple of smaller ones. I think the other one I bought because I saw a mask in it, and I, at the very least knew that, Zactat is always interested in some Bionicles. So I picked them up, I bought them, and I was fiddling with stuff and sorting stuff out, and it was like, oh, it was hitting the nostalgia button in a way I had not expected. It was perhaps all the more intense because I hadn't expected it. So I went back on my way home the next day and picked up like three or four more of the other Bionicle bags that were there. And I think I went back a third day because I told myself you can't spend all the money in the world on Bionicles. And I think by the time all said and done, over the like 3 days, I spent like 30, maybe $35, and I got something like six, maybe seven different bags. They weren't all particularly large. I think most of them were like $4 bags, and there were a couple of bigger ones.
Yeah.
And I got a whole mishmash of parts. I got stuff, like I said, I got Throwbot stuff. I got stuff that was clearly from the Mata Wave, because I had a Kopaka torso, and I got stuff that was clearly from a Rockshi, stuff that was clearly from a Metru, and stuff that was clearly from Latorians and Avmatoran. It was just a whole mishmash, even some Hero Factory stuff in there. And it was just, I had enough heads and enough torsos and stuff that I just started putting stuff together and building stuff. And the fun of posing Bionicles and making them like leer over ledges or bookshelves with their weapons and their toothy grins, if you're a Paraka, it just sort of rekindled in me a whole lot of excitement.
Yeah.
And I didn't do a whole lot more with them then, but it did sort of have me looking and thinking, and I got out some of my own Bionicles from their dusty canisters and forgotten corners, and it kind of kicked into full gear right around, and probably because you started this podcast.
There was definitely a Bionicle swing of a mood that basically kicked in, I think, shortly before I started the podcast, like back in like beginning of January or something. Because I get swings of Bionicle moods, but I know I had group like me and X specifically kind of gone on our big old Bionicle mood, smack us in the butt, and basically gave me enough motivation to start the podcast. And I know I basically pretty much from the beginning said I wanted you on it at some point. And well, you've actually been one of the most consistent viewers listening to it. And 90% of the time we talk about Bionicle.
Yeah, and I think it was that like steady diet of, oh, this reminds me of things, but also I've mentioned the word lore a lot because I am addicted to lore a little bit. As a child, my idea of fun was taking the encyclopedias off the shelf and just reading through them A to Z, skipping all the articles that were about science and boring things and reading about history and geography. And some people may know my biggest love in life is the Lord of the Rings and all of the lore to go around that. I arguably met my wife because of that. Uh, and I love Star Wars and that aspect, of Harry Potter, and in my own creative endeavors, that's sort of what has really driven like my Lego webcomics is it's creating a lore of sorts, and that element of Bionicle is really well done, and to the point where even the stuff I disliked in the past, just the sheer immensity of it and all the interlocking multiples of stuff that are going on all at the same time, that has been a major shepherd's crook yanking me back on stage.
As an outsider who's basically been witnessing this, it's been very, very interesting, especially because as someone who bought about a good third of your collection that you sold off, it's I never thought I'd see you get back into Bionicle at all.
Yeah, well, in a sense, when it did happen, and when I was like actually selling stuff off, and you were walking away with my beautiful Moaka, it must have been something of a like formative experience for you as a younger brother, because it was like the first time that one of the like great Lego members of the family de-Legoified a bit. I mean, it was close. Shortly after that the Lost Toa started becoming lost, but I think I had him beat in terms of like actually taking action on that. he might have like started falling asleep, but he hadn't done anything drastic like sell off chunks of his collection.
Well, surprisingly, despite him being actually entering a full Lego Dark Age while you only entered a Bionicle one, he never really sold any of his collection. Near the end, he basically sold some other stuff that he hadn't touched or opened before, like stuff in it while he got in his Dark Age. But because you'd moved down to the States, you were getting married, you were selling off your Bionicles. I was like, man, the guy's lost. He's done. I can get all this Bionicle. It's great. And because the only other time I really remember any of the siblings basically selling off noticeable items of their collection was Mithra, who had sold some sets to the Lost T.O.A. Especially like a Dark Forest and like a rescue set. Nothing like substantial, but notable items.
But even so, our sisters were never quite the same sorts of Lego heads that the brothers were. We have to be honest there. So it
True.
wasn't the same sort of shock to the system, perhaps.
Yes, it was. I mean, I wasn't going to argue it at all because I wanted my complete Tahu mask collection. I wanted the merchandise, so I wasn't going to argue at all. It was an opportunity, and I took it.
Indeed. And I don't, like I've said a couple of times, I don't necessarily regret selling it off because I think it was the right decision insofar as it would have just been way too much hassle. So, because I didn't take it with me when I drove out here initially, I left the Bionicles at home because, let's be honest, all those Bionicle canisters, I probably saved myself a couple of cubic feet in the van. That was helpful space.
Plus, Bionicle wasn't a priority by
It
any
was
means, and you were
not a
just like,
priority by any means, but what it meant is that Bionicles were in the leftover category of the stuff that over the following like 4 or 5 years, every time I was home, I had to try and cram more stuff into the suitcase or get rid of it. And I think it did take about 5 years to clear out everything and have it where nothing was left at Dad's place. So that's where selling off the Bionicles had an advantage. It was like, well, I was like, I believed it too. I was never going to get back into Bionicles. I don't need these. Sell them off to someone who will appreciate them, make a quick buck, and that's that much less that I have to deal with.
we've reached the 40-minute mark. I think we've basically covered more or less everything that there is to, unless we want to go into like really long rants. Like we can always keep talking, but I'm like, I think we've kind of covered what we needed to. Really, there isn't much substantial items left about your Dark Ages with Bonkel to really go over. I mean, there's basically some stuff going on now that you've been doing with Bonkel, which we might have to talk about another time in the future, maybe.
Yeah, the big question mark is not so much the past as the future. Like, how long is this Bionicle mood going to last?
By experience, they last a good while.
As moods have gone, this has been a pretty long and well sustained one. But I've been a Lego fan for, let's just say, basically my entire life. I know that moods change and stuff that was up front and center disappears to the back of the lineup for a while, and Bionicle was at the back of the line for a very long time. So what is it going to like? Is this sort of like a giant one-off, or is it something that we're going to just keep seeing cropping up again and again and again?
All I know is my bonk mood had almost actually died off a couple weeks ago. Like I was just kind of, everything was kind of dying. I wasn't really expecting anything in. But then basically I got the last parts to the Master Builder set and Thornadison, which was the last set I needed. So that rejuvenated basically my bonk mood again. It basically kicked it right back into high gear.
We'll see. I've finished assembling a creation of my own, which is a new take on Variki, which is interesting because I never knew about Variki in my childhood. That's an internet rumor that did not make it onto the internet I knew, but it sort of captured my imagination because it does go back to that Toa Mata Rock year sort of nostalgia for things, and it's a little story hook. How can I work this in and make it fit for me? And I think the story end of it is going to be where it does continue to latch on, and we'll continue to see it again. But like, who knows? And the big question for a lot of Lego fans is what things change when you have kids, and I've already started to notice that. My 3-year-old is big enough now that he wants to come down to the Lego basement and he wants to play with his Lego. And something breaks or looks cool or looks interesting in Dad's collection, can I, wheedle it out of him? So, is there going to be a Bionicle revival in the next generation?
It'll be interesting to see, but I feel like definitely talking about the future and the direction your Bonko universe is going is definitely a topic for another time. But for today, I think we'll probably cut it there. It's definitely been a very interesting one to relive, to see back about how the only one who, who's someone who actually, you're the first one to actually go into a dark age to some extent and come back out of it like almost pretty much fully. So it's definitely been interesting to see that, and definitely I'm going to be hopefully talking to Eck about his dimming of his Bionicle collection, because I think there's enough to talk about there. But yeah, no, this is fun. I'm glad to have you on again, of Hau1.
And it is a great pleasure, as always, to be here, although I can't promise that I will listen to and comment on this one.
That's completely understandable. But yeah, so we'll end it there. Thank you everybody for listening. I hope you guys have enjoyed this one. I have been your host, Onvermel. This has been the T.O.A podcast, and we are retiring from the night.